Hi, everybody. We are going to get started in a few minutes, so settle in, and we'll be back. I feel like we should have some intro music here. Any recommendations, Lise? Yonis? I feel like we should do the "Oh Canada" version of Julie Black's "Oh Canada" that she sang at the MBA gathering a few weeks ago.
That would be a good idea.
I just sort of find it on Spotify. But welcome, everybody. We will be getting started if you just joined in a minute. And really excited about the conversation today about access to capital in Black communities. Okay, we are going to get started now. Thank you all for joining us today. Myself and I think many of my colleagues here on video are joining from the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississauga Pacific Credit, the Nishobe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, which is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Many of us have come here by choice. You know, I am a child of immigrants who immigrated from India to Canada in the 70s. But we also need to consider that others came here as a result of historical force. And we want to acknowledge the complexities of that history as we start our conversation of access to capital across Black communities in Canada. So we are New Power Labs, for those of you who do not know us and are being introduced to our work. Labo Pouvoir Innovant. We are a think tank do tank. It's really about how do we shift capital and shift power across Canada. Our goal is to support those who deploy capital, who hold the power to unlock opportunities and resources to underfunded and overlooked communities. We work across the capital spectrum. So this is philanthropy, impact investing, venture capital, traditional bank financing, and across a series of diversity lenses, from gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, citizenship status, language minority. It's really about, we have the opportunity to unlock the vast amount of potential that exists across Canada if we start to rethink how resources and capital flow across the vast levers of diversity that exist across the country. So today we're going to be talking about access to capital in Black communities across the spectrum of capital, and have an amazing set of friends and colleagues who have joined us. Lise, Victor, Yonis are phenomenal leaders across Canada driving change. We also have my colleague Shiemaa, who will be moderating and curating the conversation today. So I want to share one thing before I hand it over to Shiemaa. Is, core to what we do in New Power Labs is about creating that accountability and transparency in the sector. And when I say in the sector, I mean any sector that flows capital, so philanthropy, venture capital, traditional bank financing, so that we can translate the good intentions that we hold of wanting to support communities that are diverse into action. So how do we, as folks who hold power often, who deploy capital, start to make those shifts to truly unlock that potential of Canada? So on that, I'm going to pass it over to my wonderful colleague Shiemaa, who drives a tremendous amount of data research work with New Power Labs. So over to you, Shiemaa.
Thank you, Narinder. Appreciate the intro. And welcome, everyone. We are incredibly grateful that you are all have joined us today for our first of our New Power Talks series. My name is Shiemaa Khogali. I'm the Data Science Product Associate at New Power Labs, and I'm honored to be hosting today's discussion on access to capital in Black communities. This is an incredibly important topic, and I'm grateful to be joined by our esteemed panelists who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to this conversation. So joining us today is Lise Birikundavyi. Lise is the managing partner at BKR Capital, the first institutionally backed Black-led VC fund in Canada. She's an innovative finance specialist who has worked with several international institutions, most notably the Jacobs Foundations, for whom she managed the EdTech and Impact Investment Strategy. Lise also mentors and supports highly promising and impactful startups in emerging markets. She is a firm believer in using the forces of capital markets as a basis for more inclusive wealth creation and sustainable poverty alleviation. We also have Yonis Hassan. He's the CEO of Justice Fund Toronto. Yonis, Justice Fund Toronto is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting communities in conflict with the law. He serves as the board member of UKI Projects, Food Share Toronto, and a handful of communities across Toronto. He previously served as a board member of Social Planning Toronto, CP Planning, and a fellow of the Institute for Canadian Citizenship. As well, we have Victor Beausoleil. He's the current president and CEO of Intuit Consulting and founder of SETSI, the Social Economy Through Social Inclusion Coalition. Victor is on the board of directors for the Toronto Community Benefits Network, a board member of CEDNet, the Canadian Community Economic Development Network, and REACT, the Regional Ethno Advisory Council for Correction Services Canada. Victor has written 11 books and currently resides in Toronto with his wife and 4 children. So welcome, everyone. So through today's conversation, we hope to explore the realities of capital flow in Canada, the challenges and opportunities that Black-led founders face when seeking access to capital, and the work being done to invest in Black futures and a stronger, more equitable Canadian economy. We look forward to a stimulating discussion. And to kick things off, let's start the conversation with a quick question to everyone here in the seminar. By having this, we open this poll right now. What is your sense of capital flow to Black communities in Canada over the last 2 years? Do you think it's improving, staying the same, or getting less capital? I'll give everyone a minute to take the poll. Okay, so it looks like we have the majority, 48%, believe that the situation is improving. So that's a great optimistic view, which leads me to my first question to the panel. So New Power Labs was founded in 2020, a year when many conversations were happening around supporting Black communities in Canada. So what is your sense of how things have shifted in your sector since 2020? What went well, and what still needs work, and what sectors need to join in? Lise, would you like to kick us off?
Absolutely. Hi, thank you. Thank you, first of all, for having us here. I'm humbled to be a part of this panel, and I always like interacting with New Power Labs, sorry. Over the past 2 years, what has been interesting is that despite not necessarily being a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, a lot of different communities have been empowered with a certain level of funding, which has allowed different set of voices to be elevated. We've seen also a lot of people who were working independently in the dark start becoming visible as well. And then more and more, I think that initially when you were seeing different pockets of, accelerator programs being funded, initially the fear was that everybody would, work on their corner and that it would become a competition between each of them. But we're seeing collaboration. People are speaking with each other and are helping each other. So from that perspective, I believe that there has been, a beautiful evolution. We also launched our fund, which is the first Black-led fund in Canada. Initially, when that happened, to be frankly honest and transparent, we were both, Isaac and myself were shocked, especially at when I was told I'm the only Black female fund manager that, all of these institutions have funded, and it was 2021. So it wasn't really a source of pride, it was more a source of how come? And then, what's our positioning now to make sure that this changes, right? But just the fact that this has happened and that, we're building a community and that things are moving, I see that as being positive.
Great. Yonis, what's your take on this?
I'd like to thank Narinder and the team at New Power Labs for organizing this event and having me speak. I'd say no, right? I'd say no. The reason why I'd say no is over the last few years, we've seen a series of initiatives launched from government, corporations, and the private and the philanthropic sector to encourage more flow of capital. But for me, all I've really seen is a series of virtue signaling and incrementalism that does not really address the core issues that our communities are suffering from, and is rather putting a tremendous amount of capital in the hands of people that don't have lived experiences resolving these issues. Majority of the, fund managers in Canada that are working on social finance are white, that lack the lived experiences, that lack the history. And I think over the last 3 years, we've had a white conscious awakening in finance. And that has only translated into capital for that set community. So, we will not solve 400 years of economic, social, and political exploitation and extraction with incrementalism. $200 million for a Black endowment school, $700 million of social financing is great. But we put a lot of burden on leaders like Lise and Victor and Narinder to do a tremendous amount of education to equip our communities so we can actually take advantage of this capital. You know how hard it is to explain to people who've never heard of these terminologies the difference between ESG, traditional, responsible investing, traditional investing, thematic investing, impact first investing. It's a lot of work, and that burden is often put on Black leaders. So I would say we made incremental steps, great, but we have a lot of work to do.
So I'll go back again to the same point, Yonis. What are some of the work that you think needs to be done?
Oh, there's a significant amount of education that needs to happen. And again, that education is being led by organizations like SETSI and Victor. I do think that, from a government perspective, there should be set metrics on equity set in place, particularly around the social finance fund. When the private sector, I think, there's so little that we can control with the private sector, but philanthropy with over $120 billion of assets in Canada has the capacity to transform, take risk, and make bold investments, to do that education, to take that risk, to be that impact first investment community. Has it done it so far? No. But I do think that government has a tremendous role that it could play holding philanthropy accountable. One of the things that our organization is calling for is all foundations in Canada by 2030 to have their assets aligned with impact investing. And I know we need to do a set definition of impact investing, but you guys know what I mean. And that, with the hope of that, is to align ourselves to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals on clean finance. Canada has a responsibility both in terms of our role in terms of environmental degradation around the world. We have a responsibility to use all the tools, all the mechanisms, and all the capital that we can to build a better world.
Great. Victor, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I give thanks as always to my ancestors, to the original stewards of the lands that we're on. I give thanks to all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we share, build, and learn together for our collective liberation. I'm a husband, father of four, and in terms of my social location around this question, I think things are getting worse. I love Yonis's points around, I think you said a white conscious awakening. I think it's guilt, and you can't build from guilt. So we're seeing guilt based off of centuries of extraction. We're seeing guilt based off of exclusionary, stratified, incestuous networks flowing capital amongst themselves. I'm inspired by the work of CFC, Communities Foundation of Canada. That's based off of Andrew and Melanie and Allison, a few individuals. A lot of times when we look at capitalism and colonialism, we see these logos and institutions as just logos institutions when they're actually made of people. And these people have the ability to transform communities that for the longest time have remained on the periphery and the margins of the economy. Yonis spoke of $120 billion. If you just look at the infrastructure file in Canada. So philanthropy has $120 billion, and it's about seeding power, and it's about economic reconciliation. And how do we see power, and how do we transform communities to have some form of economic reconciliation? Simple. Supports Isaac and Lise at BKR Capital. Simple. Like, it's that easy. Identify how you scale and amplify the Black and Indigenous fund managers and racialized fund managers doing this work. It's that easy. Jeff Sear from Raven Capital raised 5 million, then 30, and they just closed at $100 million. That happened because Jeff is brilliant. That happened because of years of Indigenous leaders working hard to build out an ecosystem. So right now, the Black community specifically needs to facilitate market making, needs to facilitate, I don't want to say capacity building, because that assumes that we don't have the capacity. I'd say resourcing to enable bandwidth. There's a difference. I don't need my capacity built. I do need resources to be able to scale the bandwidth of my work and my ability to engage and develop and transform the communities that we serve. So in terms of your question, I think things are getting worse, primarily because now we know. We didn't know before. There wasn't Yonis's and Isaac's, and our elders and community stalwarts who are on the front lines of struggles. We're fighting for food, clothes, and shelter. We're fighting for it was a different fight Charles Roach had, Dudley Law, Sharona Hall, Dr. Charmaine Marine. So now we're playing in a very different ecosystem, and we weren't aware. And now that we have awareness of the amounts of capital to solve these pervasive problems that have impacted our community. I got 34 dead friends behind piss poor urban developments in Scarborough. So now that we're aware of the amount of capital that could be flowing to solve some of these wicked problems like housing, mental well-being, impact investing is a tool that can change lives, and folks are still playing. So I think things are getting worse.
Thank you for sharing that, Victor. So that building on that point, I'd like to ask about the recent Philanthropic Endowment Fund. So Minister Ahmed Hussein just announced a historic 200 million Black-led philanthropic endowment fund to be administered by the Foundation for Black Communities. This is a moment to be celebrated for sure, but still on the downside, could this be just seen as just checking the box by the government responsibility? And if so, how can we mitigate this? How can we ensure that more consistent efforts by the government and other sources of capital to invest in more Black-led organizations and communities continue? Victor, what's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I applaud the leadership of all the Black-led organizations that went through this process, because the process, unfortunately, was very tribalistic, and it pitted Black organizations anchor institutions and nonprofits against each other for a process. I'm not blaming the government for that, but I applaud the leadership of Liban Abakar and Rebecca Durant, Dr. Joseph Smith, their entire team. I'm glad it's so heavy, a remarkable CEO leading the Foundation for Black Communities. I applaud my brother Craig Wellington, Colin Lynch, Dennis Mitchell, the folks of the Black Opportunities Fund, Sharif at the Alberta Center. There's a lot of people that put forward requests to be able to steward these resources. But I want to make sure that we're clear. This is not $200 million going to an organization. This is $200 million going to Black communities stewarded by an organization. So context is very important. In terms of the federal government, I have great faith in the leadership that I'm seeing emerging within very specific government departments, primarily because I just left a meeting yesterday where some of the calls that me and Narinder have been calling on for almost 2 years have been implemented in the Social Finance Fund, around disaggregated data, around benchmarking and targeting, and many voices. So definitely the federal government is working, but I still feel that after all the Black communities have had to endure over centuries across Turtle Island, and even to this day, like the only reason why I'm talking to you is because there's children mining in the Congo for us to use these laptops that we're all on right now. So I feel like it's almost a slap in the face when the federal government used the word millions to Black communities. If you're talking Black, you got to talk billions. And for me, that's something that I want to become a soundbite for all Black leaders, because we cannot do much with crumbs. $200 million sounds like a lot of money, but it's hard to put a Band-Aid on a gun wound. And I believe that this is a remarkable first step in terms of ensuring that a Black-led organization that's Black-led, Black-mandated, Black-serving has the ability and the opportunity to steward $200 million and to subsequently empower social purpose organizations, mission-driven businesses, and a plethora of community need. But the fact remains that Black communities have had to endure remarkable atrocities across Turtle Island. And those traumas are felt big and small. And a lot of work needs to be done, and it requires resources. And COVID-19 showed us the government can pivot in a second with resources. Identify how many community futures associations there are across the country. There's over 260 of them. There was a rapid relief fund. I think that was $500 million deployed very quickly. And that's because rural communities across Canada found their economic voice and built up associations across the country and organized. As our honorable ancestor Malcolm X said, we're not outnumbered, we're out-organized. So we need organized demands. And I believe that this is a good step forward. I applaud the federal government for their leadership, but I believe that once again, a lot of more work needs to be done. I saw Narinder mention in the chat on the last question you had that venture capital for Black entrepreneurs plummeted 45% in 2022. This is what data shows. So in terms of the last question, yes, we're doing worse. In terms of this question, we can do a lot better.
I couldn't agree more, Victor. Lise, what do you think?
I'm also aligned with what's being said, but in a different way. So I chose the private sector as basically a tool for change because of all the energy I'm seeing, you know, in Yonis and Victor, like sort of like really going and disrupting, and you know, and I agree that we have to be organizing demands. The reality is that yes, there's $120 billion in philanthropy available in Canada. There's $8 trillion in private equity and venture capital in North America, right? And that's independent of feelings. It's not about sort of saying, hey, do you feel guilty? Please give us money. Or you change strategy, then, you know, all of a sudden, everything that we've built is no longer serving to anybody because we don't have money. Now it's about building things that bring value, regardless of the color of your skin. You build a business, you're the next Calendly, for example, right? Everybody's using Calendly now. The company is worth a little bit over $3 billion, I believe, right? And people will invest in this company based on what the value that is providing. Nobody cares right now about the color of the skin of the founder. And that's the power I find with the private sector. So I think that, you know, as much as we're looking, and so I'm bringing back that point earlier, in the grand scheme of things, we're not necessarily being provided a lot of money. So everybody's aware of that, right? But this is still much more money that has ever been provided to the Black community. And right now we do have this opportunity to make that money circulate, to try to start funding people who can create value, because we know the amount of talent that exists in our community. We know the amount of ingenuity that exists, and basically get these people to create and independently grow their businesses, and then start reinvesting in other entrepreneurs. And those flow of capital will not necessarily change because there's a change of mandate. People care about their communities, right? But it's about empowering people from private sector perspective. That's why I keep on being optimistic, because I see that from, you know, from that perspective, there is this alignment where people are working together. And I think things are looking up from that perspective. We need to start being, you know, using what is made available to basically build sustainably.
And where will we be without hope, right? Yonis,
Exactly.
what do you think?
I think it's hard to follow up those two. Yeah, $200 million is great. I think it's a good seeding. And you know, the federal government has a responsibility, I think, to engage Black communities and create mechanisms that mobilize and encourage additional capital. I am a recovering and liberated fundraiser. The reality of the fact is, funders, whether they're impact investors or philanthropic foundations or investors, will not believe in anything until someone else contributes to it first, particularly when it comes to Black communities. Now we have an entity that has $200 million in their endowment, which is about what, 10, 15, $20 million annually dispersed across Canada if they have a good year. That's not going to solve hundreds of millions of dollars in inadequate housing, the lack of food security in our communities, the lack of transit, violence that has transformed intergenerational poverty in our communities. That can only be solved through economic mobility. $200 million is not going to cut it. We need billions of dollars in investment across Canada. And I think philanthropy can play that role. We just choose to allow ourselves to be comfortable with the incrementalism that is provided towards us as scraps, because we are often afraid to bite the hand that feeds us. I recognize my privilege in saying this, right? Our organization was co-founded by, you know, one of the biggest artists groups in the world, right? I recognize I have the ability to say these things, and other organizations and leaders do not, which puts a tremendous burden on organizations and leaders like Victor. Over the next few years, I think, and it's already started, funders are going to be satisfied with the $200 million or other investments that have been announced over the last 3 years as, okay, we've done our part. It's already started. Donor fatigue has already started creeping in. If the changes and recommendations and solutions are not backed in changes in bylaws, governance structures, or increased capital cash in the hands of these organizations, everything else is just feelings, and feelings are not going to solve anything.
Thanks for that, Yonis. So this takes me to the next question, which digs more into awareness. Many within the Black communities are not aware of some supports that do exist, and they may not be accessing at the moment. What's one example of something that works well in creating awareness, for example? And I think, Victor, you have a wealth of information to share with us here.
Yeah, sure. Right now, as we speak, SETSI is facilitating a leadership panel, like right at this very moment. We facilitated 34 leadership sessions over the past month with, I think, over 50 speakers. So leadership series, workshops, capacity building sessions, information sessions, finding ways and means to gather As people of African descent, Black communities, we're people of oral tradition, but we're also students and learners. We facilitate monthly study groups on very specific topics. We have a climate action study group that's in partnership with StarCap and Athabasca University. We have a study group specifically on social finance. We're supported by the Miriam Safa Fund and others around the SETSI, IRE, and the Justice Fund as well, in terms of an impact investing research initiative, which also has a study group. So these models of bringing together peoples of African descent, Black communities to study, learn together, learn from each other, learn from thought leaders and practitioners, very important and something that we practice literally daily. As I mentioned, we have something happening right now. In terms of other ways, I believe that a lot of sectors, the private sector and nonprofit, charitable, philanthropic, public, is primarily speaking to the PMC, the professional managerial class. I know that we recently developed something called SECOM, Social Economy Communications, primarily because at SETSI, we post 7 days a week. So Monday through Sunday, we post on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Most nonprofits, charities, philanthropic foundations stop at LinkedIn or just Twitter. They don't have Instagram accounts. I'm not saying you need to go far right or far left and be on TikTok, but the fact remains that you need to find ways and means to engage Canadians on the margins, the periphery of the economy and ecosystems, and LinkedIn and Twitter is not enough. So shameless plug, I'll put the email in the chat. If you want to reach out to Ma'at at setsi.ca, she can hook you up and support you in terms of your needs around social media. And then I think another piece that's really important in terms of amplifying our message, we do a lot of writing. I put out an op-ed with Caroline Hilton, our remarkable colleague from Indigenomics recently. We do concept papers, position papers. I'm writing a position paper right now on decolonizing data with Alana Landsberg-Lewis. That's going to be out some shortly. So those are some of the practical things that we do to ensure that we amplify not just our work, but the work of an ecosystem that historically has excluded us for various reasons.
That's amazing. Thanks, Victor. Yonis, would you like to take a take on this?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I speak to a lot of frontline organizations and community groups. Often when we are granting in a trust-based philanthropic manner to, non-registered organizations, small nonprofits, youth collectives, social enterprises. And a few of those organizations have actually participated in the investment readiness program and have found it wholly inadequate. However, Victor and his program and SETSI, I'm gonna give Victor his flowers and his team their flowers because they do a tremendous job of taking the sector's, pseudo-intellectual verbal diarrhea of buzzwords and simplifying it into meaningful actions that people can do to read, research, and then act upon. That takes a lot of work. That takes a lot of mental fatigue. That takes a lot of burden. And that is often put on Black leaders like Victor and his team. So for me, in terms of that knowledge exchange across Canada, particularly for Black communities, like Victor said, they are relentless in terms of the education that they do for our communities. So I give thanks to them. I need to stop teasing the IRP program. It is effective in its ways. I do think that more capital, $50 million is not enough across Canada, or some $100 million or whatever they did. I do think that the outreach for that program should have been increased amongst racialized communities, particularly those that are harder to reach. For example, we work with Youth in Conflict with the Law. They are some of the most brilliant innovators I've met in Canada. They do not have access to this type of language. And like Victor said, all this work is built on our ancestors I am one of their beneficiaries of their programs. And I have the ability to do this work right now because of leaders like that. Charles Roach, Sheldon Taylor, the list can go on.
Thank you, Yonis. Lise?
In terms of education about the resources available to the Black community, I think that all of our organizations have, a role to play instead of just doing the work that we're set to do in order to make sure that our communities are advancing with us. So We have, we've put together a resource page on our website, but on top of it, on our social media, we do have a learning series for all of the entrepreneurs who are trying to understand venture capital, because we do have this, we speak to entrepreneurs all the time, and a lot of them just don't understand what that is, and what it entails, what is the relationship, what the relationship will be on the long term. So we try to break down, the language, the commitments, what it takes to be also VC backable. So on a regular basis, you'll see that as a learning series on our social medias. Then we also try to make sure to connect with as much founders as possible. We're a small team. We've received over 600 decks since we started. But having those 15 minutes call with people who reach out to you and basically listen to them, even though you know from the beginning that they will not necessarily be a fit for your fund, and then point them in the right direction, making those intros. You probably won't fund them, but somebody else will, right? So that's something that we work hard at, and that we're quite proud of. I think that it's just amazing the amount of beautiful projects people are working on.
Thanks, Lise. Okay, so I have one more question here before we go to the Q&A. So how does the movement we're building here through New Power Labs, along centering access to data, pushing forwards with accountability and transparency, and trying systemic approaches, how does that work intersect with your own work across philanthropy, impact investing, and venture capital? Lise, what do you have for us?
I think everybody's complaining about the lack of data in Canada when it comes to everything around Black entrepreneurship, the ecosystem in general. So having New Power Labs working on collecting some of this data on equity is definitely helpful from our perspective. We work a lot as well with the Black Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub. We know that there's a lot of other bodies who are also collecting information. There was a beautiful report by Pitch Better. So all of this is definitely useful. We're a data-driven industry. We're working with what we have right now, and we're also extrapolating a lot of information from the United States. We take information from our own proprietary network, but the more there is reports and data coming from institutions like yours, the more helpful it will be for us, definitely.
Thanks, Lise. Yonis?
So can you repeat the question one more time?
So the question was, how does the movement we're building in through New Power Labs, centering access to data, pushing towards accountability and transparency and systemic approaches, how does that intersect with your own work?
For us, we mainly play in the philanthropic space.
Yeah.
Philanthropy for us exists to transform and take risks. That includes in impact investing. We have not seen that adequately across Canada, I think. In fact, I think philanthropy has put a tremendous burden on racialized communities, and especially if you look at the intersectionality of it, Black women, racialized women, to do a lot of this work. Pitch Better, Asamoah Henry, obviously Lise is the first Black woman, Narendra, New Power Labs. What are we doing here? So that's number one. And number two, I would say that Canadian philanthropy is very reactive to waiting upon outrage or data to act when its main purpose exists to be proactive, to take risks. And we have not seen that adequately. I commend organizations or foundations like Ivy Foundation, the largest foundation, or the sixth oldest foundation in Canadian history, that just recently announced that they'll be spending their assets down, I think, over the next 5-7 years, and prioritizing investments in the environmental sector. We need that type of transformational leadership. We need that type of courage. And unfortunately, philanthropy has not demonstrated that.
Victor, you have anything to add?
Yeah, in terms of Yonis's points, I agree completely. I would add, I love what the Definity Foundation, Artie and Tamara are doing out there. There are a few philanthropic leaders that are stepping up. In terms of how our work at SETSI intersects with your work at New Power Labs, we directly have worked on a few things together, but there's 6 primary ways. So SETSI, in partnership with our remarkable colleagues Sherilyn Shak and Narinder, partnered on a report, the In the Dark reports. This In the Dark reports was a comprehensive document that laid out the impact investing landscape as it relates to inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. Or I actually, at SETSI, we use the term JADE now, justice, access, inclusion, diversity, and equity. So that's one way, in the dark. The second way I believe that we can intersect is SETSI co-founded the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience, CINDR, with the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund, the Tamarack Institute, N10, the CIO Strategy Council, and Imagine Canada about 1.5 years ago. And a lot of the work that we're doing at CINDR, I believe, connects. SETSI has been working for the last 4 to 6 months on the Decolonizing Data Institute with Alana Landsberg-Lewis, Catherine Babcock at Capital W, Arlene McDonald from the Federal Data Working Group, Ryan O'Neill Knights, quite a few others. So I believe there's an opportunity there, because right now the challenge that we face when it comes to data is data's been weaponized against our people. Like, whoever collects the data, analyzes the data, stewards the data, governs the data, disseminates the data, ultimately has the power. So those are some of the ways. In terms of impact investing specifically, recently, about 1 year ago, our remarkable colleague Lauren Zobel and Lindsay Wallace from CAFID received information around the Global Steering Group, which was built in the UK. And Canada was given a mandate to build a NAB, a National Advisory Board on literally impact investing. So TIP, the Table for Impact Investment Practitioners, led by our brilliant colleague Jaleesa Brown, as well as CAFID, have been working on a task force around this work. Narinder and myself have been involved from inception. So I believe our work intersects specifically around the building of the National Advisory Board on Impact Investing and ensuring that it is a space of belonging, where we're not wrestling over inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. It's a space of belonging, and there's representative diversity in that space. And then the last, or the 6th item, is through my work in the impact investing space that was supported by the Justice Fund, by the Miriam Safer Fund, and others, and through the CRE, I've been able to engage over 20 national advisory boards across the world. I believe there's 57 of them in total. And I identified structural racism, anti-Black racism, systemic discrimination. Global Affairs Canada has never funded a NAB in Africa. There's only 5. And Global Affairs Canada, so my sister Atiano, who lives in Nigeria, who right now, Nigeria is about to have a new president, and any moment now, leads a national advisory board on impact investing in Nigeria with 200 million people. $0 from Global Affairs Canada. But Peru has money from GAC and many others. So I think that, and I'm not going to I don't like to call folks out. I like to call them in. The MasterCard Foundation has never provided any of the impact investing NABs in Africa with any resources either. And I've double and triple checked. So I'm saying all this to say that in terms of intersection around our work, definitely the work with CINDR, the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience, definitely maybe In the Dark Part 2 reports, definitely some work around Decolonizing Data Institutes, and definitely the work around the Africa Impact Investment Movement that we're developing to ensure that the NABs in Africa have access to resources the same way other NABs across the world have, that have different concentrations of melanin.
Thank you, Victor, and thanks, Lise, Victor, and Yonis for this great discussion. We have some questions in the Q&A. Here's a question from Relay Tangi. Due to lack of generational wealth and access to capital challenges in our Black community, or that's rather a comment, in our Black communities, are there any equity support mentorship programs which can support regular entrepreneurs? Most of the programs which I have come across in the last 3 years focus on founders and technology startups.
Yeah, that's a great question. So definitely, I would reach out to Ryan O'Neill Knight at the Afro-Caribbean Business Network. They're doing some remarkable work there. I would definitely reach out to Nellifer at the Dream Legacy Foundation. They lead the Black Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, but they have some remarkable programs. I'd reach out to Stephanie Edwards at the Black Business Professionals Association, which is run on the president is Ross Cadastro and the CEO is Nadine Spencer. But Stephanie Edwards is the director of programs and services at the Black Business Professionals Association. They have weekly sessions of and mentorship programs. I'd reach out to Doug Minter at the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce, which was founded by Michael Forster. I'd reach out to Elder Rustin's staff at BBI, the Black Business Initiative. I'd reach out to Lily and Alfred Bergeson at the Tribe Network. They're doing some remarkable work. One of the most dynamic, bold, innovative, young, nascent organizations for Black entrepreneurs, from not just founders, but folks. Those are some of the folks off the top of my head. Yeah, those are some of the folks off the top of my head, but I'm sure if I think of more, I can put them in the chat. Oh, I'm Brother Pharaoh Hamid Freeman from the OFC, One Full Circle. They're doing some remarkable work in Montreal as well.
I think it'd be worth it also to share the link of all the recipients of the ECHO funding, because a lot of these organizations are providing, and I think most of the ones that you have named, Victor, were recipient of the ECHO funding as well. And they're providing really good support to entrepreneurs, not only in the tech space.
Absolutely. Clemens Hassine at the BIPOC Foundation and Brother Deepo Ali at the Black Business Ventures Association. So Clemens is in Lethbridge, Alberta, and Deepo Ali is in New Brunswick. And Tossin from Welcome You. Yeah.
Yonis, do you have any additions?
I think they got everybody.
Okay, we have another question from Kaltuna Jama. There are so many loops and holes Black organizations need to jump through to get funding, and some racialized organizations unfortunately do not know how to apply for these grants. How can we support Black organizations in accessing capital? Perhaps it would be helpful to create a database of funding available to Black organizations.
There are a few startups that have started doing that. Happy is one of them. It's a Black-led tech startup based out of Montreal. If ever you go on it, it gives you information on everything that is available to you, I think from a grant perspective, as well as government program, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. I think that a lot of times, in terms of jumping through hoops, I would say just change the narrative and the mental model around that. You'd be surprised how far you can go with an unsolicited proposal. Like, I think if you sit down and do some funding forecasting, look at your mission, your vision as an organizational leader, and look at some of the philanthropic foundations, nonprofit charities that are doing similar work to you. And if you have a brilliant idea, draft a one-pager, draft an executive summary, draft a deck. Have your one-pager, your executive summary, and your deck align with your websites and your social media. And then book a meeting. Walk that person through your idea, through the deck. They say, hey, send me some more information. You're prepared. You hit them with the one-pager. They chime in one of their junior staff to review the one-pager. They ask for more information. You hit them with the executive summary. By the third touch, you may have some resources if you're diligent, if your idea has value, if your idea solves a problem, and if you have the ability, once again, because part of organizational development is operations and governance. Governance is the fiduciary responsibilities and being able to steward resources, and operations is being able to have the capacity and bandwidth to fulfill on whatever the idea is. If you have those things in place, I'd say don't always wait for folks to put out a granting program or stream. You'd be surprised how many organizations are sitting on reserves, and if you give them a good idea, they may engage. And Yonis mentioned there's $120 billion in the philanthropic sector, and our brilliant colleague Lise talked about the $7 trillion in the venture capital space. There's an abundance of resources. I think it's all about your approach and execution.
Yeah, just to add, co-sign everything that was said, just to add to that, if you are a charity or a nonprofit that's trying to work on, the strengthening the capacity building of our communities, or approaching this from a charitable angle, I'd say prioritize mission-based investments, right, rather than project-based investments, because funders need to know that organizations need resilience and not just to go from project to project. If you are based in the GTA or Ontario, loophole, if you have a Toronto Public Library card, you can log into something called Grant Connect, and it'll give you a list of all the grants available with the deadlines, what the criteria is, and who to contact. Grant Match, Google it.
At least put something in the chat, Haply.ai.
That was the resource I provided before. Basically,
Oh.
it supports finding what are the sources of money for entrepreneurs.
Thanks. And as Narendra mentioned, NPL is also launching a new tool as well in the next few days. So stay tuned. It's called New Power Match that will help folks get introduced to impact investors. So stay tuned for that. We have Sarah Wolf from the Indigenous Innovation Initiative. She says, love what you're all doing. How can we work together more effectively to address the common narratives while also supporting the distinct needs as Black and or Indigenous and or intersectional underserved population?
We need eldership. I think that I believe heavily in the institution of eldership. I was, as a young man, a leader at a age where I shouldn't even been in a leadership position when I look back, because I was 22, 23. And now as a 39-year-old husband, father of 4, I recognize that's why I take calls like from there's certain brothers in their 20s and early that call me for advice and support. And I'm not an elder by any means, but what I'm saying is as a senior older brother, I can provide some context. So I believe in terms of collaboration for our community, like where is our National Elders Council? Like where are our regional elders frameworks and models? Every community has some form of intergenerational collaboration that makes sense for those leaders of its time. And I think a lot of the challenges that we face in our community, whether it relates to org on org violence, you know, I mean, I think I may have, I'm not Black on Black, but like a lot of the challenges that we face, I think can be mitigated and circumvented if there are stalwarts and community elders, because remember, eldership is not assumed. It's something that is provided to someone. Like the community says you are an elder. Like Louis March from Zero Gun Violence is an elder. Nene Kafele is an elder. Itis Sazu at a different book list is an elder. There's so many, I can name a long list of elders in every region. Nova Scotia is the first region in Canada that actually has a formal eldership council. But it makes sense. Nova Scotia is also the only province in Ontario that has a ministry specifically for African Nova Scotians. So I'm saying all to say that if we're going to collaborate well, effectively, and sustainably, then we need eldership, or else we're not in a community. We're not in a village. We're in a toxic community where we come together for weddings and funerals. Oh, sorry, I mean grants and funding opportunities. And I mean, so we need to find ways and means to collaborate, even when it's not about a grant or a funding opportunity or an announcement. We should just be collaborating for the sake of building. And I see it happening, and I'm excited, but I feel it requires greater eldership and intergenerational collaboration.
Yonis, do you have anything to add here?
Yes, communities of shared oppression have shared futures. When we talk about philanthropy in Canada, it is settler philanthropy. When we talk about the ridiculous hoarding of assets, it's assets that have been built on the exploitation and extraction and genocide of Indigenous communities. So we are in this together. We have a responsibility to do that work and you know, have those shared narratives and advocate and amplify each other.
Thanks, Yonis. And Lise, anything about impact investing or venture capital in that with that remark?
Yeah, there's a lot of definitely intersectionality, right? So we speak with other minority focused groups, and minority quote unquote, because we're still talking about the global majority, right? And we're looking at the same type of issues. I think what's very important is that we don't fall into the same type of traps. You know, it's easy eventually to start focusing on your community and having the same type of behaviors that you were condoning before, right? And by having those conversations, sticking together and just making sure that you keep the door open for everyone to come and learn from you. That's how we'll all grow. And what I love about our field is that it's result-based as well, right? So we understand that talent is distributed equally, right? That by investing in someone for an idea, it's not about their skin color, it's about the power of their brain. And I keep on talking about this huge opportunity cost of, having, I don't know, a child in rural Tanzania who has the brain power to solve cancer, but doesn't have the resources around them, or is not allowed to be part of around the table to basically participate or contribute to that issue. Everybody loses. It's not just, a country, it's not just a skin color, right? So when we are democratizing investment, let's make sure that we keep, not only we're focused on the Black community, but we keep in mind that we need to see female founders in our portfolio, right? We love diversity in our portfolio companies. It's not just about having only Black founders, it's basically having that spirit of having inclusion within your company. And that's basically, and I think that is true, having all of these conversations with other players in the space, that you keep that light, there, and that you keep going in the right direction.
Couldn't agree more. So this concludes our panel today. Thank you so much to our esteemed panelists, Lise, Victor, and Yonis. Thanks for sharing your insights and experience on access on capital in Black communities. Your knowledge and expertise have shed light on so many important issues facing the Black-led founders these days. We hope today's conversation has provided valuable insights to everyone. I would also like to thank behind the scene team, Han and Kasha, Narinder, for bringing this panel to light. And finally, thanks to everyone who joined us today and tuned in, and for our first New Power Talk series. We have one more ask to ask: if you can give us your feedback and follow the conversation via social media channels and our website. We hope you'll continue to join us for future sessions.
And I'll add one more thing. A big thank you to all of our partners. New Power Labs is a partnership between Ontario Trillium Foundation, Duca, Impact Lab, Coast Capital, Community Foundations of Canada, and the Maria SF Fund. So thank you all. We wouldn't be here without you. In addition to all the community partners, which include the work that Lise, Yonis, and Victor run. And Shiemaa, thank you so much for the amazing moderation of today's conversation.
Thank you, everyone.